Glad to be here.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. Thanks to all of you for being here today. Thanks, of course, to our very special scientist guests. My name is Shelby. I am Reveri's head of community, and I'm really looking forward to helping co-host today's session with two science experts on overcoming loneliness and improving our well-being. This is a really important topic, and I think it's something that is touching all of our lives in one way or another. And there is a lot of research on this topic as well. So in today's session, we're joined again by two really knowledgeable science experts. We're going to be discussing the research on this topic. And perhaps most importantly, we're going to be interacting with you all with a few exercises and giving you all practical tips that you can start applying in your life today to foster more meaningful connection and improve your well-being, regardless of what is causing this apparent rise in loneliness. I mean, some of us might even say that we're in a loneliness epidemic. It seems to be impacting people at younger and younger ages as well. So, and it's something that can not only, impact our mood and our mental health, but even our physical health. And so that's why it's super important for us to find ways to combat that and enhance our well-being. So that's what we're going to be doing here today. And I also want to remind you all that you'll have a chance to ask questions at the end of today's session. It appears I was not able to enable the chat for you all, and I'm sorry about that. So continue to use the Q&A that you're using now for those that are live in attendance, and ask any questions you have throughout the session. My colleague and I will be moderating that and watching those questions, and we'll do our best to get to all of them at the end of today's session. But even if we don't have time at the end, we're going to do a follow-up with everyone via email afterwards. So without further ado, I know you're all looking forward to getting into it. I am just going to tee it up by introducing the special guests that we have today. Starting with our special guest, Dr. Ben Rein. Ben Rein is a neuroscientist and a science communicator whose research focuses on the neurobiology of social interaction. In his research at Stanford, Ben has been studying the neural basis of empathy and how it can be enhanced. Ben also shares educational videos to an audience of nearly 1 million social media followers and serves as the Chief Science Officer of the Mind Science Foundation. Dr. Rein, hello. Thank you for being here.
Hello. Yeah, I'm very happy to be here, and obviously, as you can tell from my research description, excited to talk about this important topic.
And for those of you who haven't seen Dr. Rein on Instagram or TikTok, it's quite the treat to watch him explain the brain without the mumbo jumbo, as he says so aptly in his bio. And you'll all get a preview of that today, as well as links to his work after this. And last but certainly not least, someone who's always present at these sessions with us. He is the Associate Chair of Psychiatry at Stanford School of Medicine, and he's got a lifetime of experience, clinical experience and research in helping thousands of people overcome serious challenges like insomnia, PTSD, anxiety, stress issues, pain, you name it, and Reveri's founder, Dr. David Spiegel. David, always a pleasure.
Thank you, Shelby. Glad to be here.
Wonderful. Let's get into the topic at hand. So first and foremost, what does the science say about this apparent rise in loneliness that people are experiencing? Is it even real? Can it be measured? And what might the effects be on our health? Dr. Rein?
Yeah, so there's certainly an uprise in loneliness, unfortunately. I think that, coming out of the pandemic, there's been a lot of changes. There's over the last, decade or 2 decades, there's been so many changes concurrently that kind of have been pushing people to become more insular. There's, of course, the pandemic is a big one. Everyone experienced that sensation of being isolated for an extended period of time, maybe for the first time ever, probably for the first time ever, and got to see just how uncomfortable that can be. But then there's also all these other changes that are happening simultaneously where, there's social media, there's FaceTime, various ways to interact with people who we're close to without actually seeing them face to face. There are technological advances that are making routine face-to-face interactions sort of obsolete. For example, instead of going to the grocery store, we can use something like Instacart and not have to leave our house, and we don't even have to interact with the person delivering our groceries. We could have telemedicine appointments without leaving our house, without seeing the person face to face. We can tour homes that are for sale without actually walking through the home. We can do it from home without engaging with our agent. There's just anything that you can possibly imagine for the sake of convenience. There, it has been sort of isolated. And so as a result, as you mentioned, the US Surgeon General declared a loneliness epidemic. People, if you look at the data, the survey data, people are reporting having fewer friends than ever before. People spend more time alone than ever before. And it's just sort of concerning. It's a topic that I'm especially passionate about because, of course, there's a great deal of value in interaction itself. And, actually, I want to point out so Linda in the chat said, I just retired for 30 years in education, and I'm really missing the daily connection with students and colleagues. I stay in touch, but it feels like it's not quite providing co-regulation I got from being in the presence of many people all day. Thank you, Linda, for sharing that, because it's a great description of how it feels. It's sort of a gradual process that when you're isolated, you work from home, whatever it is, you sort of start to feel this absence of that interaction. Unfortunately, there's so much data showing that isolation increases the risk, being socially isolated increases the risk of things like dementia and diabetes and depression, anxiety, you name it. It's not good for you. But the good thing is that, on the other hand, interacting is sort of the perfect cure for all of those conditions and all those problems, where people with stronger relationships show just greater health overall. So I think that a very sort of first initial step is just spreading awareness about the fact that talking to people, interacting with friends and family, visiting, leaving the house, even going to the grocery store and striking up a conversation with the butcher, talking to your person cutting your hair, just get interaction where you can, because it's really truly foundational for health and well-being.
Over to you.
Thank you. My turn. Well, I'm feeling socially more comfortable being with you, Ben, and you, Shelby, and you in the audience. As a psychiatrist, I think that a pandemic is a great way to produce social phobias, if you think about it. That people, going out, the kinds of things Ben talked about, are things that used to make us happy and comfortable. And you would, talk to somebody in a store, bump into someone on the street, stop in and have a drink somewhere. And all of a sudden that becomes not only not available, but dangerous. And the problem in building fears is that the more you avoid it, the bigger the fears get, because you don't have positive experience talking, interacting with other people, but in avoiding it, you're creating a cache of negative expectations about what's going to happen. I'll get sick, I'll catch COVID. Or if I go around, I have to be wearing a mask. We did a study around the world in 2020. Sorry, I don't have COVID. I do have a cold. We did a study with Maine Adamson at the Palo Alto VA. Sorry. And what we found around the world was that the age group that was most affected by COVID isolation was not the group who was at most at risk. So the death rates were highest in people 65 and over. It was people 15 to 30. They were far more distressed and anxious. And the reason is that, think about it, that's the time in life when you're supposed to develop away from your family of origin and build families of orientation, make new friends, build new families. So these were people whose social life task was most interfered with by the pandemic, not because of a threat to their health so much as a threat to their well-being. And if you think about it, human infants are the most dependent of any mammal on the planet. And that means that for infants to survive, they have to find ways to engage their parents in looking after them. And parents have to develop the sense of loving and caretaking that encourages them to do it. And it is very clear that social connection is intricately involved with survival. And I'll talk later about some of the illnesses in which that's the case. But the main point is that our ability to engage, if you look at what infants are like, they're cute, right? They have big heads, small bodies, they have big eyes related to the rest. And that's not accidental. That is, they attract attention and care, and we need it. And so it's our task to develop and maintain social connections, despite the fact that it has been very hard to do over the last few years, as been described.
Yeah, I love that point you made about the phobia. That's something I was thinking about a lot during the pandemic, about how suddenly social interaction, something that's always been natural, you don't really think about it, it just happens, sometimes conveniently, sometimes inconveniently, was now completely colored with this fear and anxiety that if you get too close to someone, you may be putting yourself at risk. And that is such a dramatic difference and such a psychological shift. And I've thought a lot about how, they may have permanently, or for at least a while, affected people's perspective of social interaction. I think there's a lot of artifacts of the pandemic that remain with us, and some of them are things like that are psychological. Other things are behavioral, where someone stopped going to the gym because they were afraid of catching COVID there. Instead, they put a gym in their house, and now they just have this habit where they used to go 2, 3, 4 times a week out of the house, interact with people. Now they don't have that anymore. And so this could be another behavioral adjustment that leads to a reduction in the amount of interaction we get daily and weekly.
That's absolutely right. And there was a study just published in a psychology journal showing that the rates of loneliness are especially high in the United States, higher than in European countries. And I think it's population density that in Europe, most people live in a town where you can walk down the street at least and see people and get food. In America, half the people live a car's ride from anything. And that means that it is harder and less pro-social to go out. And so if you combine that with the fears you're going to catch COVID, it makes people reluctant to do it. And then you add the kind of social polarization that we've suffered, where just wearing a mask becomes a hostile political statement one way or the other. If you're wearing a mask, you're one of those chickens who also likes vaccination, and if you don't wear a mask, you don't care about threatening other people around you. And so we've got some real social problems that are interfering with the natural social discourse.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you said it. I'm in the sort of early stages of working on a book, and I'm writing about empathy. And I'm writing this section about talking about how we empathize less with people who are different from us. It's just the natural way the brain works. And just yesterday, I was writing this section about, imagine you're driving along the highway and you see someone broken down on the side of the road, and what's your likelihood, scale of 1 to 10, of pulling over and helping them? Let's say you start at a 5, right? Okay, now imagine that as you're driving by, you notice that their skin is a different color, and they have a bumper sticker that is a politician that you don't like, and they're wearing a religious emblem that's the opposite of the religion, or different from the religion you identify with. That number, scale of 1 to 10, is going to change most likely. Or if it's the opposite, if they are endorsing the politician you love and they are wearing the same religious emblem as you, it's just how the brain works. That's just the way the brain empathizes with others, because when we're more similar to others, we can extrapolate more accurately their situations to ours, and so we empathize more. And so with more and more seemingly reasons to identify someone as different or the same. I think that the American society, at least, has become very polarized, and identity has become a very central thing. And there are many ways that we establish our identity, that there are just a lot of ways to either include or exclude someone from feelings like empathy. And that's also a big problem, the way I look at it.
It is. We're tribal, and there was a time in prehistory when identifying whether you were a member of your tribe, someone approaching you as a member of your tribe or another one, might have survival value. He'd be less likely to kill you and take your food than if he wasn't. But now we tribalize everything we do. I mean, it's sort of fun with basketball games, but it's not fun with political discourse and conflict and force. And so I think we're in a bad situation where not only are we alienated from one another, but we're getting self-righteous about it and saying, who would, just like you're saying, I wouldn't want to stop and help that guy on the road. And I can remember a time not so long ago when it wasn't like that, my son Dan went down to Florida to campaign for the Democrats, and a guy stopped him on the street in Florida, and he said, "Well, I don't like Barack Obama," and Dan said, "Well, I understand that, I get it, but here's why I do." And they had a reasonable talk for about 10 or 15 minutes. And the guy at the end said, "You haven't convinced me, but I thank you for coming here and talking to me." So, that kind of social contact can bridge those sorts of barriers, but sadly enough, it often doesn't, and less these days.
Yeah, definitely.
I think that's a really perfect segue into the next section. I think it's very clear to everyone and apparent what are the challenges that we're facing today, individually as well as at a societal level, regarding isolation and disconnection from one another. So thank you both for that discussion. And in this next section, we really want to understand what are some things that we can start doing today to foster a more meaningful connection, whether that's with random passersby on the street, or planting the seeds to make deeper connections with those already in our lives, or even making new friends as adults, which can be very challenging to do. And so to tee things up, I want to pass it over to Dr. Rein. He's got kind of a thought experiment, if I can call it that, to share with everybody, and I'll let you explain that before we get into it.
Yeah, so thank you, Shelby. Very soon, Shelby will release a poll. There will be 3 questions. And actually, just in a few moments, I just want to kind of tee it up. Try not to answer these questions through the lens, and I'm speaking to you, the audience. Try not to answer this through the lens of what we're talking about, the importance of enhancing connection and stuff. I want you to actually think about just a genuine, naive response, how you would answer this outside of the context of this webinar. And Shelby, you can go ahead and launch those. The first question that you're going to see, I want you to picture this scenario really deeply. It says, if you were working late in the afternoon and got a phone call from an old friend, would you answer it? And just to expand on that a little bit more, I want you to picture that it's 3 or 4 in the afternoon. You're stressed out. You're working on this project. It's an important project for work. You're really kind of deep into it, and you just want it to be over. You're not enjoying the project at all. And then you see your phone buzzing on your desk. In that dilemma, to continue working on this project or answer this call from an old friend, someone you haven't spoken to in a long time. I'm very curious about your response on that. And then I'll give you a couple minutes to answer the other 2. Those are more self-explanatory. I don't really need to preface those.
Awesome. The answers are starting to pour in. Are you able to see the responses on your screen, Ben?
No, I'm not allowed to vote either, unfortunately.
You would skew the results.
Yeah.
Okay, the answers are coming in. Thanks, everyone. This is optional, of course. If you don't want to, you can skip it. But I'm seeing, in terms of the first question, if you were working late in the afternoon and got a phone call from an old friend, would you answer it? So far, the majority of people say yes. 53% are saying yes. 23% no. And the other 23%, I don't know, or it depends. Looks like that trend is staying fairly steady as people continue to answer.
Okay, then let's start there. So, of course, I've asked you this question on purpose. I'm curious about this because it's sort of a situation that we might face all the time. And it really gets to this question of, where do we value social interaction relative to our work? And for many people, I think if actually put in that situation, maybe even some of the 53% who voted yes, they might actually not answer the call. But I will believe that at face value, 53% would, and I applaud those 53%. Nothing against the rest. I just that I think I probably would say no. I think if I were in that situation, I would probably not answer the call, because it's so easy to get absorbed in your work, and to, especially like in the situation I described where you hate this project, you just want it to be over, you want to power through. But in reality, of course, as you might anticipate, I'm going to say the best thing you could possibly do is answer this phone call, because there are so many studies showing that after a single interaction, we feel much, much better. There's studies in various contexts, some where they are invited to, create an artificial interaction, like a subject in a study, they're asked to talk to someone, they're asked to do something social, and immediately after, people report feeling better. Of course, there are also organic studies looking at things like there's a college study where they had these college students wear basically a wire for a week, and they had the students report their mood throughout the day. And they found that consistently across the students, they reported feeling much better and having more positive moods right after having an interaction. And this is just the way it goes. And so I would propose that if you were to answer that phone call, although you might spend some time on the phone, it would actually be the best thing possible for your work, because you would end the phone call rejuvenated and refreshed and ready to move on. And so in that situation, if you are presented with that, assuming that you're not working towards some urgent work deadline, I would strongly encourage you to take that call. Now, Shelby, what about question 2? Where are we at with this one?
Okay, so question 2 is, if I told you to start a conversation with a stranger on the bus or train, what percentage of people would you expect to reject your advance? I gave people a scale. Let's see, 2% of people said that they think 100% of people would reject the advance. And then 12% of people said it'd be somewhere between 75 and 99%. 29% of people said between 50 and 75% would reject the advance. 22% of people said between 25 and 50% would reject the advance, and then 36%. So the slight majority said below 25%. Those were the options I gave.
Okay, great. So seems like roughly a bell curve-ish with a skew towards the bottom though. So the reason I asked that question is I mentioned these studies where they ask people to deliberately create social interactions. There's a professor, Nicholas Epley at University of Chicago, who does these really awesome studies, and they basically approach strangers at the train station and say, let's have you go talk to someone random. Like, let's have you start a conversation with a stranger. And they asked all the people in the study that they recruited from the station platform this question. And on average, people said about 50%. They guessed that about half the people they approached would reject their advances. And in reality, across these studies with, several hundred participants and several hundred spontaneous conversations, 0 strangers rejected the conversation. There was not a single person who was turned down. And I think that says a lot about how we feel, the way we sort of assume others' intentions and how we imagine that they're going to respond to us. In reality, I think that the other thing that's interesting about this is that those same people, they rated themselves, or they guessed that they were more interested in having a conversation than everyone else. And that's statistically impossible, that everybody in the study would rate themselves as being more interested in a conversation than everybody else. So I think that we tend to assume that people don't want to interact, but there may be more flexibility there than we actually imagine. That if, of course, you don't want to go up to someone who's got headphones in and they're writing a paper or something like that. But if someone's just kind of sitting there on the train or on the bus, or in a waiting room with you, where they've conducted these studies in all of these settings, it's worth a shot. If you're bored and they're bored, because by doing so, you might actually benefit your well-being and benefit their well-being, which brings me to that third question. I'm optimistic about this one. So where do we land on this, Shelby?
All right, question number 3. How do you think this conversation that we're having right now would impact your mood and experience, better or worse than sitting in solitude? So the vast majority at 79% said better, 6% said worse. Okay, ouch. And 15% said no difference.
Okay, great. That's good. And by the way, I meant that as the conversation described in number 2.
Sorry. Okay,
Yeah.
that was my mistake then. That's not how the question was framed in the poll, but
that's okay. Yeah, hopefully people interpreted that. But yeah, I'm glad that 79% said better, and that is accurate. Again, in these same studies, they asked the people this question, and most people were kind of pessimistic about this. They were like, it's probably going to be no difference on my commute. This is what they did. They had them have these conversations during a train ride, and they asked them beforehand, the researchers asked the subjects beforehand, how do you think this is going to affect your commute? And they basically said, well, I don't really think it's going to make much of a difference. But in reality, of course, otherwise I wouldn't be talking about this study, those who were in the social group had a much better experience. They reported a much more positive mood, a much more pleasant experience. And they had 2 control groups. One that was just a true control, where the person was instructed to just do your normal train ride. And then they had a solitude condition where they were asked to just sit quietly. Okay, great. Now we have the final results. So, and they found that more so than sitting quietly, more so than your average train ride, interacting with others was the best thing possible for mood. And the longer that people spent interacting, the greater their mood was, the greater their improvement in their mood was. These studies have been replicated in various countries on trains. They've been replicated in buses. They've even been replicated where they had people who were leaving the airport in Chicago, getting into their taxi. They said, start a conversation with your taxi driver. And the same thing, it improved their mood as well. And then they also have done studies where they've asked the stranger and found that the benefits were also perceived in the stranger as well. So not only do we tend to assume that people don't want to be approached. Whoops, sorry, not that. I do this all the time, the thumbs up thing. I tend to count with my thumbs. Not only do we assume that people don't want to be interacted, and that's vastly underestimated, but we also fail to perceive and consider that by interacting with them and starting a conversation, we actually may be driving a health benefit for them as well as ourselves, because interaction is so fundamental for our well-being that it's just good to interact with others. Of course, there are limits to this. If you get into a heated political debate and you're yelling at each other, that's not going to be good for anyone. But it's just casual conversation, asking someone, hey, what book are you reading? What'd you do today? Tell someone about your day. I think that this is such it feels very strange. It may feel very strange to do something like that. But in reality, it's like this kind of hidden in plain sight biology hack that we could all sort of leverage to just feel better every single day.
That is very interesting. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think everyone, I think I just stopped sharing those results in case they were sitting on anyone's screen. But I think that everyone, as we're seeing in the responses, agrees that it's very interesting, sometimes counterintuitive. And, I definitely know that I'm one of those people that would, think that someone else, like a stranger, doesn't want to talk to me, or, I'm not going to answer the phone call probably from my friend while I'm working. So that was really helpful. And then are we ready then to move over into Dr. Spiegel's exercises regarding this point as well?
I'm
Or
ready.
did you have more, Dr. Ben?
No, I mean, I could talk endlessly about the value of interaction and even that it could be said that the decision to pick up the phone, and someone said in the questions, why not call back the friend later? There's no dilemma. Of course, I understand that that's a possibility, assuming that you couldn't call them back later. But, I could even make the argument that decision of whether we pick up the phone, that decision of whether we interact with someone on the train or here or there, could have some grip on our actual longevity. There are studies that the more we interact, the stronger our relationships are, the more likely we are to survive broadly. There's studies that tracked like hundreds of thousands of people over years and found that the stronger people with stronger social relationships were 50% more likely to survive throughout the course of the study than those with weaker relationships. And that makes social isolation twice as bad for you as obesity and 4 times as bad for you as living in an area with high pollution. So there's, it's not just about making your day better. It also may be about truly supporting your well-being. And I don't say that to put fear in everyone's heart, but to show, on the other hand, that there is tremendous upside in interaction, and that, you should call your friends, you should visit your family. And, if you're empathic enough to do so and to think this way, you should consider also, what is the social status of those around you? People who you're close to, are they getting enough interaction? Especially older people, our parents or grandparents, are they receiving enough interaction? Should we go visit them?
Right.
That's really important and often not discussed.
Lots of really helpful points. Thank you. David, over to you.
Yeah, I think what Ben is elegantly arguing is the principle of get connected or get lost. That it is very hard for people to live alone. There are, as you mentioned, marital status is a strong predictor of longer survival, including, it's as strong a predictor as also as smoking, which clearly shortens survival. And the idea that just being with someone could make such a difference in your life is underscored by the fact there was a study in the Journal of Clinical Oncology, which is not some, flyaway journal, 750,000 cancer patients over 5 years. In all 10 types of cancer, married cancer patients lived 4 months longer than unmarried cancer patients. So stay married or get married, but it makes a big difference in survival. And it might interest you to know that for men, being married to a woman is what extends survival. For women, it isn't necessarily being married to a man; it's having a strong relationship. So women are good for your health regardless of your own gender. Men, not so much. But it is very important to stay connected. I can remember being in a beautiful art museum in Japan on a weekend when all of the young women were dressed in the traditional garb, just these beautiful silk outfits. And I walk into the museum, and there were 8 of them sitting around in the center of this room of beautiful paintings in these beautiful outfits. And all 8 of them were looking at their screens and weren't interacting with what they were wearing, with their friends, with the paintings, just screen. And so screens connect, but they also disconnect. So it's important to keep that in mind. So if you like, what we can do is a little exercise to sort of prepare yourself, because I think, it's activation energy to connect with people. And in particular, there's understandable concern that people will be suspicious. What are you selling? What's going on? Am I going to be stuck talking to you for 2 hours when I've got to get somewhere? So let's think about getting yourself in a mindset to make a social connection using self-hypnosis. And we teach people using the Reveri app to easily test how hypnotizable you are in about 6 minutes, and then use your ability with hypnosis to control your psychophysiological stress and change your behavior. So if you'd like, get as comfortable as you can. And if you don't want to do this, that's fine. But I will remind you that the group is mostly doing it, so join the group.
I'm going to participate in this, but for everyone's sake, I'm going to turn my camera off momentarily so that we can watch me.
Okay, thanks, Ben. Look up high as you can, all the way up past your eyebrows. Slowly close your eyes and take a deep breath. Let the breath out, let your eyes relax, but keep them closed, and let your body float. Imagine you're floating in a bath, a lake, a hot tub, or just floating in space. And then take your right hand and stroke gently the back of your left middle finger along the back of your left hand, over your wrist, all the way to your elbow. And develop a sense of tingling and numbness and lightness in your left hand, and let it float up in the air like a balloon. Later, if I ask you to pull your left hand back down with your right and let go, your left hand will float right back up to the upright position. You'll find something pleasant and amusing about this sensation. After that, when I ask you to touch your left elbow with your right hand, your usual sensation and control will return. So sitting comfortably now, I want to teach you a special breathwork exercise called cyclic sighing, still floating. I want you to start inhaling with your belly, diaphragmatic inhale, and through your nose, about halfway. Now expand your chest fully and fill your lungs, and then slowly exhale through your mouth. Again, inhale through your nose, starting with your belly. Hold. Now fill your lungs completely, and slowly exhale through your mouth. One more time. Inhale, starting with your belly through your nose. Hold. Expand your chest, fill your lungs completely, and slowly exhale through your mouth. Now, please notice how quickly and easily you can use your store of memories and your imagination to help yourself and your body feel better. Now, I want you to imagine that you're in a situation where there are a bunch of people you don't know around. It could be in a train or a bus or on the street. And I want you to imagine what you could obtain by making contact with somebody. And there are two parts to it. One is focusing on how this might be good for you, as Dr. Rein and I have discussed, that social connection is good for you, it's good for your health. So think about what you hope to achieve, just a moment of respite, an interesting story on your way home. Think about what the benefit of making a social connection would be, so that you're focusing on what you're for, body floating, safe and comfortable. And now I want you to see this interaction from the other side, from the perspective of the person you plan to approach. So what can you say to them that will tend to make your overture welcome and reassure them? You know, you could think of saying something like, I'm sure you only have a moment, but I just wanted to touch base with you because your dog is so cute. Or because you're wearing a hat that I really like. Where did you get it? Or some other story that gives it definition, so that they don't feel that they're opening the door to all kinds of interaction that they're not prepared for. So the idea is to see the engagement, both from your perspective, what you hope to get, and from their perspective, what they're afraid they might get, or what you have to offer to them. And just concentrate on how it might change your day if you can go home and tell people you met a really interesting person on the bus or the train or in the store. And here's what I learned. So the idea here is to view the potential bonus or benefits of it. And at the same time, start out by limiting the intensity of it, so that the other person is more likely to understand what you're interested in and engage with you. Body still floating. Inhale again through your nose, starting with your belly. Hold, fill your chest, expand your chest. And now slowly exhale through your mouth. So picture yourself doing it, and in a moment, we'll come out of the state of self-hypnosis by counting backwards from 3 to 1. But first, I want you to now take your right hand and touch your left elbow. And let your hand float back down, so that you can experience and enjoy the changes you were able to make in your body and your level of tension in it when you're asking yourself to do something that involves a bit of risk. You focus on what you're for, and you focus on how to make it agreeable to the person you're approaching by giving it clear definitions. So now that your hand should be back down, make a fist, open it. We'll come out of the state of self-hypnosis together by counting backwards from 3 to 1. On 3, you'll get ready. On 2, with your eyelids closed, roll up your eyes. 1, let your eyes open. Hand float back down, make a fist, open, and that'll be the end of the exercise. Ready? 3, 2, 1. Okay. I hope everybody is back with us. Ben, are you back with us? What was that like for you?
I am back with us. That was amazing. And I want to say how cool it is after being a user of Reveri and then experiencing a live David Spiegel hypnosis session. It's really cool. And I'm not,
Thank you.
if this is something that routinely happens in these community sessions, I think that's amazing. And if it's not, I think it should be.
Thank you. Well, we are doing it. Shelby is terrific at social organization, and we are trying to do this with each time we do it.
Good.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Spiegel, and thanks, Dr. Ben. It's great to have you here too. So usually what we do directly following these sessions is a quick debrief, particularly if anyone has any, usually there's no adverse reaction or anything to a hypnosis session, but in the event that anyone has any concerns or anything questionable that came up directly from that 8-10 minute exercise that Dr. Spiegel just walked us through, we do want to give you a chance to raise that now. We're watching the questions come through in the Q&A box.
Okay.
And if there's if there's nothing, no concerns related to that, I think we're going to dive into the Q&A.
Yeah, the chat was disabled for a while, I think, unfortunately.
Yeah, we do have people asking questions in the Q&A, and I've been reading those.
Oh, I see. Got it. Got it.
So yeah, sorry about that, everybody. The chat somehow got disabled. But since Lorelia just mentioned that they're feeling a little bit of dizziness after that session. What would you say about that, Dr. Spiegel?
Is this something that happens to you commonly, or is this an unusual reaction, Lorelia? And can you imagine yourself, for example, lying down? Just look up, close your eyes, and imagine you're lying down where it's comfortable and not worrying to feel a little dizzy. And can you tell us how you're feeling now? How are you doing, Lorelia? Yeah, go ahead.
You could also unmute yourself if you want to speak.
Yeah, unmute yourself and tell us how you're feeling. We want to know. There you are. Can you just unmute yourself and tell us how you are?
She said that she's feeling better. Thank you. Usually dizziness happens when I'm relaxing. Okay.
There you go. Okay. So you're really relaxed. That's a good sign. Okay. Thank you.
Peter asked, is the session or one like it available on Reveri?
We do have sessions that are similar, but we actually don't at this point have the kind of social connecting session. It's a good idea. Maybe we'll work on that if you guys like it. It's similar to, but different from the things that we have.
We will. We're always taking more suggestions for exercises.
Great.
And I want to jump into the Q&A and go ahead and continue asking your questions. There were quite a few that came in throughout the session, and so I'm going to start prioritizing those. One of the main themes that came up throughout this session from multiple different people is in regards to introversion versus extroversion. A lot of people said that they feel like quite the challenge, and they feel very drained to create new discussions, like particularly with a stranger, but even maybe with someone that they know. They might want to end that conversation early. And just general questions regarding the needs of these different types of people. If people feel like they are more of an introvert, perhaps, could you answer that? Of questions.
Of course. I'm so glad you went there too, because I've been looking at the chat and I was going to say, before we do anything, I want to talk about introversion and extroversion, because it's very common. So it's funny. Many of the studies that I described have asked this question, right? What happens? What's the difference between introverts and extroverts in this type of scenario? And generally, what it seems to be the case is that I mentioned the studies where they had college students wear a recording device and they reported better mood after an interaction. This is an organic interaction. They weren't instructed to interact. In those experiments, both introverts and extroverts reported better mood after interacting. So in organically occurring spontaneous interactions that people choose to have without being instructed, introverts gain benefit just like extroverts. Then they have the studies where they ask someone, let's say, sit for the next 15 minutes and have a conversation. In many cases, introverts still show this positive mood after, but there is a little bit more of this fatigue that you mentioned, and that several people in the chat mentioned, that it can be, it's exhausting. And generally, while they still show the benefits of that interaction, extroverts have a greater benefit. Then there are studies where they've done like a more extreme version of this, where they tell people to behave in an extroverted or an introverted way for a week. And because it's the origin of these studies is actually really interesting, because studies have shown that people who are more extroverted in general as a trait report being happier. And there's this chicken or the egg question of, are they more happy because they're having more interactions, or are they more extroverted because they're more happy? And so they've said, okay, well, screw it. Let's figure it out. Let's make people be extroverts for a week and see what happens to their mood. And what they found is that people who are already more social going in as like a trait behavior, they reported really strong benefits. And people who are more introverted actually reported feeling worse after the week. They were exhausted. They were super fatigued from all this interacting. And so generally, the way that I would kind of overlay all this information onto what we talked about is that if you consider yourself an introvert, and there are sort of standardized assessments for this, it's best to prioritize and maximize the interactions that you would have naturally. You know, whoever you would naturally find yourself interacting with, if it's a friend, if it's family, those are the ones to focus on, I would say. Interacting with strangers is probably still good for you, but maybe not as productive as it might be for an extrovert. And what's definitely not a good idea is to try deliberately to manipulate your social behavior in a like long-term chronic way, where every time you're on the bus, you're forcing yourself to talk to someone. You know, making a recurrent habit of it may just end up leaving you feeling exhausted. But I do want to emphasize that, again, many people in these studies who are introverted still showed benefits in a lot of these social settings. So I think there's a fine line, and we all kind of have this like social homeostatic level where some people are optimal happiness way up high in the spectrum, getting X number, 3 or 4 hours of interaction a day, where other people are more comfortable with 1 hour of interaction a day. And it's just kind of all about identifying your set point, sensing how your interactions are affecting your mood, and recognizing, okay, I'm a little bit tired. I've been interacting a lot. I had, parties the last 3 nights, and I just want to sit by myself at home. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. To do whatever's best for you. It's just like anything else. You might enjoy splurging with a piece of cake, and in that moment it's so good for you. It's not health wise, but as far as your mood, it's the best thing for your mood, but it's not something you want to do every day. I think that we should have sort of one of the ideas that I'm proposing in my book is this social diet, and that we should kind of journal how our interactions affect us, and keep an idea of what how we feel after a given interaction, to try and get a closer understanding of what benefits our mood the most, and what kind of does the opposite.
Thank you.
Dr. Spiegel, you're muted.
Yeah, I have 2 thoughts. First, Anita, thank you very much. She said you have a cold. I hope you get better soon. Thank you. I do have a cold, but it's not COVID. So thank you. I appreciate that. I think one way you can make introversion into an asset rather than a liability is when you approach somebody, say that. Say, this is a little hard for me to ask because I'm kind of introverted, but could I ask you this? And there, you're not breezing in as the polished extrovert who knows how to engage people. You're asking them to help you a little with your struggle with it's hard to initiate a social interaction, and you're more likely to get a positive response that way.
That is very interesting. And I mean, for a regular person like me, that sounds like something that would help the other person connect more with you.
Right.
There was a couple great questions in regards to how does social interaction face-to-face or in real life compare and contrast with Zoom interaction like we're having right now. I don't know if there's any research on this topic, as it's still kind of early days, but could you speak to that, Dr.
It is early days, and I wish there was a lot more research. It's a question I'm super interested in. I think that generally, the more naturalistic the interaction is virtually, like a Zoom interaction, one-on-one, both of our cameras are on, both of our audio's on, is about as close as you're going to get to a real life interaction. But I think there are still elements that are missing. I would definitely say, although these studies haven't been done, you're better off having a Zoom interaction than having no interaction, but it's probably best to be in person, face to face.
Yeah.
Then there are like social media interactions where someone posts a picture and you comment something on it, right? That's technically an interaction. You're both engaging with each other in a way that truly influences the other person, but there are none of the social cues involved. There are no facial expressions. There is no tone. And I actually, being a researcher who studies empathy and being a social media person who's chronically online and very public and receives a lot of comments, many of which are negative, I have a bit of a theory about empathy on social media. And what the theory really boils down to is that because those interactions are so unnatural, there are none of those social cues, the brain areas that are naturally engaged to model and empathize with the other person's emotional state do not come online. And therefore, I think people are much more prone to what we might call inconsiderate behavior. You know, you're not empathizing with the other person, so you're much more likely to leave a comment of something mean. Because when you say that mean thing to someone in person, you watch their facial response. You feel, if you've made them feel bad, you probably are going to feel some level of discomfort and empathy observing that. But on social media, there's none of that. And so I think we're a little bit more prone to being mean to each other. At least that's how it feels as a social media influencer, if you might call it that. But I would love for someone to do those studies. Maybe me.
There's one very touching email I want to, or comment I want to be sure we get to. And it underscores how when you become more revealing of yourself in your situation, you're more likely to invite engagement. This is Lori Brian. Last fall, my husband of 41 years died, and now I have to be with and talk with people all the time, every day. It's difficult for me to reach out and interact so much, but the loneliness is otherwise unbearable. Is it possible that eventually I'll find a balance of being able to be alone again and not needing to be with others so much of all the time? But, you know, I would ask yourself a different question, Lori, and that is, what would your late husband want you to do? I think he would want you to feel socially connected, even though he can't be there to provide that. So sort of have your husband on your shoulder as you decide how to reach out and get reconnected.
That's really beautiful, Dr. Spiegel. Thank you.
Sure.
We're coming up on the last few minutes of today's session. Was there anything else, Dr. Ben, that you saw in the questions that you really wanted to address before we end today's call? Because we can always, we're gonna recap all the questions in a grand recap of today's session as well.
Yeah, I'll comment on, someone asked, is there any study about the role of self-imposed limiting beliefs like rejection or disappointing others or self-worth when engaging in conversations? There is a study that comes to mind immediately. I haven't read it recently, but from what I recall, there's a tendency for people to sort of stew in their own mistakes after interactions. That, you know, when someone has an interaction, if you ask them afterwards, what's the most salient thing? What was the most memorable part? They usually say something stupid that they did, or, you know, a mistake that they made. And, you know, I think that it's natural. My only piece of advice or comment on this is that whenever that happens to you, just remember that the person you interacted with is not thinking about what you did. They're thinking about what they did. They're thinking about their mistake or their lapse. And, you know, I think that there's a lot of value in kind of putting that aside, recognizing that tendency to become a little bit anxious post hoc, post interaction, recognizing that it's just a natural human tendency, and instead trying to reflect on what were the most positive moments that happened. You know, what was a moment where we bonded that I really enjoyed the experience? And, you know, that might even promote pro-social or social behavior in the future, where you look back and think, yeah, I actually had a really good time last time I talked to that person. I want to call them again. Instead of being like, last time I talked to them, I was so stupid, and now I never want to talk to them again or show my face. You know, I think it's getting over those things is important.
Yeah. Well, I'm feeling that way right now, Ben. So thank you. And
you shouldn't. You just gave us a lovely hypnosis session.
Happens to the best of us. See everybody. I want to thank both of you for being here today. You know, Dr. Ben, special thanks to you, as you're not usually with us, and it was such a special treat for us to have you sharing your expertise with us today. So thank you so much for that. And
yeah, thank you.
Yes.
of course, as always, Dr. Spiegel, such a pleasure having you. Thank you,
Thank you.
for imparting your knowledge and sharing the hypnosis with us. To everyone else who's here today, there were many questions, of course, that we didn't have time to answer live, but what we always do after these sessions is we'll send everybody a recap email. It's going to send you directly to the recording of today's session, as well as the main takeaways. So be on the lookout for an email from us in your inbox today. And then in the coming week, we will be doing a follow-up on the Q&A. So all the questions that were asked and these experts' answers to those questions, they will come as well. So you will all have access to that. And I also just want to share a couple links with you all in the chat. If you want to stay in touch with Dr. Ben, I'm sending his link to his website where you can find his works, etc. Online. And I will also be circulating this in the email. And if you want to find out where to use Reveri, if you haven't used it before, you can get a free trial by signing up on our website, followed by a 10% discount. And so I'm putting a link where you can access that in the chat as well. But again, all this will come via email afterwards. So once again, thanks to both of you, and thanks to all of our participants today.
Thanks so much,
Shelby. Thank you, Ben, and feel better, Lorelia. Okay.
Feel better
Take care.
Dr. Spiegel. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.